Okay, this short video we're going to talk about dealing with borders in some creative different ways. Now the obvious way, of course, is just taking something like the zero borders and you go ahead and put that in, but then you get this, distinct wall kind of look here. So you decide, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and maybe go and blur that out a little bit. The problem is it's blurring the square that's being utilized to produce this. And so now you start getting stuff kind of pulling up from the edge, which will create seams naturally. So you go, okay, well, I'll pull that in a little bit further, and then it's sometimes hard to tell whether or not you've got it in perfectly, because then it starts to leave this larger gap, and until you're really sure that you've gotten all the way there, you may end up with tiny bits of lip. So you may have to, kind of eyeball that and then try it out, see what happens. Another factor in there that might be, a point of consideration is if you were to come over here and take something like a clamp, just in case for some reason you ended up some like sort of hidden negative values that sometimes kind of creep into the Gaea builds, in which case this will, truncate anything that goes into the negative values. You can also just go ahead and say clip or clamp, but either way it's going to try and clean up any negative values there. It won't deal with the really tiny values if there's like just a tiny little bit of a lift at the edge, but at least it'll get you to that point. So that's a possibility. And of course, switching to, your alternatives from the precise to like square, and we'll just have to like adjust margin there. Right, that's not terribly square, it's circular. What are we talking about? And we have the round and so on. So if this is not doing what you need, then there's some other ways of making some custom versions for yourself. So here I've got a gradient that I've inverted, so it's just a radial gradient. And you can adjust the scale to make sure that it comes in from the border if it happens to be touching the border. You can always like inch that in just a little bit if you think that it might be influencing that. And then playing with the gamma node, you can change the fall off. And that fall off can allow you to do a pretty sharp breakup of that surface. And so I'm coming from this to this. And if I just press F on here and I play with that gamma curve, it's going to adjust how much it's cutting off and how it's cutting off. So that's one way to deal with it. It's basically sort of like a nice cylindrical cut, flattens off the edges, does a pretty good job. Another way, a little bit creative here, I'm taking a gradient. We're inverting the gradient, which flips it, and then we combine it with a set of min. This gives us a little house shape, and if we were to take that and rotate it 90 degrees, and then set it to min yet again, we get this lovely little pyramid. Yay, I made a pyramid. And then we come over here to the blur, and the blur is going to soften those edges so we don't end up seeing them. It also softens the base, but that again can be adjusted. So if you felt the need before you blur, you can show up a transform in there and scale it in a little bit. How about 97? Yeah, that looks good. And the blur will do that. What we end up with is something that goes to the very edges and does a pretty decent job. Another approach could be just taking a constant and then doing a transform to scale it in to get a border. And there's our square fall off, and we just blur that, and we get this. Even alternatively, if you already have something that has a base, such as this, we transform it in, and we discover, oh no, there's like these little lips that I don't like. I like the shape of the mountain, but I don't like that business going on there. Well, I could use one of those other fall-offs to break that down, or I could, here I've done a shaper to this to make it more of like a hill or a cliff face, and those things have obviously become more emphasized. So if I didn't use those to break them off, I could come in here and do a height to this. And the height, let's just set this to G. Height is, covering this region here. And if I just take this and subtract that height from it, it just lowers that section. And it's exactly the shape of the terrain. So the benefit of this, of course, is that because it's the shape of the terrain, I don't end up with, one area like being smooth and another area not being touched at all. I have everything kind of matching the exact shape. But of course, this is only going to work in this particular case. If I were to try and do something like that to a Voronoi, it's not going to do a good job. It's going to go around the base of each individual ones, but not around the outside. So this is very specifically for things that do have already sort of a border around the edges, and then in. If I don't like how refined or non-refined it is, if I don't like that sharp edge, for example, I could come in here, take this, run a shaper on it, which will give me a local effect I can change. And I can use that to run a little blur on the base, a very small amount of blur, and that softens the bottom. Other considerations, if I want to refine the shape even further, I could come in here and do something like a auto levels to this shape. Auto levels, why would I do that? Well, if I use that to do my calculations, then when I'm doing this, I have a much broader range to control and much finer control of the fall off as well. So I can get much more precise down to a very basic level. And so when I do the fall off that, I have a lot more control. And so even the blur at the base is now very much controlled to the bottom. So by doing the auto level, you're changing the maximum height, which gives you more range that instead of using only half of the available, or in this case, like a third of the available information, by doing an auto level, we get even more. And if you wanted to refine that even further because that wasn't enough, then the auto level, you could play with things like apply a logarithmic scale, which is going to give you more height there, or equalize can play with these things as well, where it's going to change the balance and volume on the base. Apply logarithmic, but an inverse logarithmic, and now we get a different balance. So if we take a look at what this looks like, if I say F here, we'll grab this one, press F, and let's see what these different things look like. So logarithmic versus inverse logarithmic. Look how fine and refined that edge is versus how much fatter that one is. What if I were to take that away and apply an equalize, and then that balances out the fall off. So the fall off is even softer. So these things in here can help you, refine that without having to even change settings in here. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight of things that you can do to go ahead and refine the base of your shapes to try and zero out borders and get much better results than just, say, using the zero borders alone. I'll see you in the next video.